Fantastic, excellent. All right, so just as a show of hands, we did do the essential concepts in the last. This is our third week. Okay, so we have done the essential concepts before. But if anyone, if they just put their hands up or just indicate to me, we will go through that again just to give you a high-level overview. Or what we're doing this week is basically for the data management professional. And what we've designed is a sequence of steps in terms of achieving a data value-driven management approach to our data. And we've sort of put together a sequence of steps, and we put together some PowerPoint presentation slides so that we can really teach people and one of the customers that we're working on, explaining to them how this whole flow works across the different knowledge areas. And that was something that I know I've been battling with for many years. People look at the wheel and say, does that mean I must execute it from 12 o'clock, almost from 1 o'clock through to 11 o'clock? And that caused quite a few problems in version 1. And in version 2, they almost misaligned it so that people wouldn't get that thinking, because unfortunately data quality is at the end. So they thought they could go data governance, data architecture, and then they'll finally get to data quality. But there's nothing in the DMBOK. There is one diagram from Dr. Peter Aiken, who describes generally what happens in terms of the phased implementation, that they would have some form of data operations. We know most companies have got some database. Then they would go into a process of building a warehouse and reporting, and then realize that they needed governance. And so there was almost like a happenstance type of development of data management. Now, what we're trying to suggest here, and I really appreciate any feedback in terms of saying, well, is there a way? And I'm sure you've seen lots of people. I always remember this 5 or 6 years ago, doing data governance, people saying there is no one recipe for all companies. I would like to challenge that today. I think there is a recipe. I think there is a way of tackling it. And especially if we draw ourselves around achieving value and driving value using the data management program. Of course, I'm not saying that everyone needs to wait their turn before they do work. There's certainly a lot of business as usual things that need to happen. But when taking on a new project, I believe there's a flow. And maybe just to pause there, and does anyone agree, disagree, think I'm smoking my socks, or have too much heat stroke in Riyadh? Any comments?
I disagree.
Or is it Mr. Bolton? Sure, we haven't done enough teaching on you, have we?
This will be the wrong moment to start saying I disagree.
Yeah. Cool, especially when you're defining the process with us.
Exactly. Cool.
Any other comments? Anyone like to share? Do you think that we can sequence the knowledge areas, get a typical flow going when it comes to building a data product?
But how then the DAMA body of knowledge has struggled with this for so long?
Why do I think I'm?
No, I think it's quite an important
message
because one of two things: either this is correct, in which case let's not forget the difficulties that we've had in the past, and now all of a sudden there's a bit of a linear flow to the sequencing of the data management elements. But I do think it's just worthy to stop for a while and go, two versions of the DMBOK, and there's almost like this, they're stuck on the wheel. So the wheel does bring in an interesting messaging which says this is it's ongoing, it's iterative. Those are great messages from a circular icon. Of course, the real challenge is, where do I start? And invariably, wherever I start, I've got dependencies that all of a sudden inhibit.
Yeah.
So maybe Do you think that let's think back of the person who initially developed the wheel. They would have thought they did a great job of presenting the wheel, and we can understand why. But why do you think they weren't at that point thinking of execution, pragmatically being able to guide and lead a DMO?
And I also must say that, remember, there is that this Remedial version 2 brought in that life cycle approach. Remember, it's got governance and it's got foundational, and then it's got sort of the life cycle. So from planning, enable, create, and so they started to group the data management functions and put those in as a flow. So I think we saw it for the first time with version 2, where they started to put some flow in, but there still wasn't a lot of thread going through it in terms of how to achieve it.
So that's an interesting thing that you raised there, because for me, what that separation in the last DMBOK manual did is it introduced the construct of cadence.
Yes.
Not all data management functions operate at the same cadence.
Yes.
Some are quite, let's imagine some happen monthly, some happen quarterly, and I thought that separation out of the oversight and the foundation was actually quite valuable, because it told you that you're then going to operate across that the life cycle. So maybe that's the evolution. In which case, it would be really nice to land this discussion to say DMBOK, double click. It has the foundation. It has the oversight in the foundational areas with the life cycle, and then what this data value process does is it actually takes that and it strings it out one, it takes a pragmatic view at how to do that. Maybe that's the evolution. And so this is an evolving concept from round to columnar to linear.
Any other comments? Yes.
I wasn't in the room where it happened. I've heard this idea before, is how do you sequence these events? And I think it depends on where you are. I think one of the first things we do as consultants is we go in and assess how mature is this organization? What have they done? There's always been work done before we arrive.
Yeah.
We have to consider what has been done, what they've spent good money on. That will determine where we might start on the wheel. I think about it too. I don't know how I would sequence it. I would begin with something that's not even on the wheel, and that is, what is the data strategy?
Yeah, and I like what you just said there, because we're connecting with that as well, Mark. And then also this idea of ensuring that we transforming to be transformational. We almost have to have a continuous strategy, not a once every 3 year strategy. We need to move to a continuous strategy, and maybe I'll just go to that slide, so I can just show people what we mean by a continuous strategy. And now I've got to try to find out where it is. I think it's over here. Sorry.
You'll find it.
Yeah. Yeah, this is it. So this is what we're referring to is, you start your organization operating as trying to get efficiency, then effectiveness, then business transformation. And if you look at this top goal over here, and I also say that, this is data should be included in this. The end goal should be a continuous strategy and planning, convergence of business and data, growing the infrastructure, enabling flexibility and agility, and that's sort of what we talk about when we go through these transformations. So yes, I think what we're certainly seeing when we talk about being more agile, running more agile data management programs, and you want to get into that sprint type of fashion, where do you start sprinting? And is it possible to even come into an existing area that's been doing a lot of it, with some programs and charters and things like that, and say, okay, now let's get to a finer grained strategy and more sprints, starting from the right place and ending in the right place. Mark, I like your comment there in terms of saying, well, where should we always start and how do we sequence the events? And of course, data strategy is good. I think it's missing some of the valuation things that we know Doug Laney keeps on pushing, saying, guys, you must be talking value. And if we bring value into the data strategy discussion, I believe it's a more comprehensive view. And then it's about, I think Peter Aiken did that good job of
Yes,
breaking
Aiken pyramid.
breaking and then also breaking the strategy up into 3 areas: urgent, intermediate, and target. Saying yes, when we start, there's going to be a whole lot of data problems, quality issues, and they're just hectic. And then we've also got people challenges, resources not there, and then we've got AI. Everyone wanting to drive AI, and the message is you can't put, you can take a very defensive strategy and then put everything on hold, except for cleaning the data or getting trust back in the data. This can be done, but that also brings about challenges from a change point of view. Greg, any comments from you? I know you've been doing this as well for a long time.
Yeah, just to tie on to what Mark said, and the reality is there's a big disconnect between data management professionals and I would even say the rest of the world at large. A lot of air gaps. So yes. I agree with the strategy comment wholeheartedly. I mean, that's your North Star or your Southern Cross, depending on where you are.
Yeah.
But one thing that's often overlooked, which I want to bring up, because a lot of people also think, oh, it's theory and we need to get the work done. Who's got time for theory? Or as much as your strategy is essentially durable, I'm a very big proponent of having supporting principles for that strategy, because those are also durable. And to take them from theory into something practical and relatable, we've all heard the expression data is everybody's business. What I have found really works is for all of the different stakeholders that they need to have some sort of a traceability or a mapping from what they do to how they map to or support each of those principles. That's when it really becomes active data management. And if they can say, I'm going to support this principle by doing that, that allows you to roll that up to a global view and it takes it from theory to reality. So I think principles which are often overlooked are a really important thing as well.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Kileboko, anything from you? Patrick, anything you guys would like to add? Okay.
I'm covered. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. All right, let's sort of go into what we'd like to do now is make it more sequential, more showing you how we've put this, how we've laid the track down and the rails, and then it may be more interesting to have the discussion afterwards to say, okay, this is what you've suggested, and let's see how you guys feel about it. So just trying to now get to where I need to. Okay, so this is some of the what we talk about, the alignment, where in certain cases we have to align to, like in Saudi, they've got this fantastic thing of there's a national data strategy. So we need to align and we need to demonstrate how we've got the maturity, what open data we're contributing to, and they've got KPIs, and everyone needs that alignment. So now having that regulator, a data management regulator is quite an exciting thing. I've never experienced this before, but having a centralized regulator. Now, I do see rumors or people talking about that Dubai and the UAE is going there, and someone even mentioned Malaysia going there. But not many other countries have even contemplated that. So that's quite an interesting discussion. So here we can see for this customer, they are part of, lost. Okay, so we're back. They are part of managing cities, so they've got to adhere to Industry 4.0. So they're part of industrial cities and smart cities. So that's why we need to align this to smart cities. So Okay, so I think this may be the last one. That's great. Sorry. Okay, so let's hand over to JG, and let's go through this sample that we put together for this ministry that we're working.
Thanks, Howard. Cool. So yeah, really exciting to be able to present to you literally from the client's offices. And what Howard said is it is quite an exciting time when your national government decrees a certain level of functionality that's required and then sets a timeline and sets the requirement to deliver against it. And we've literally felt this wave of intensity across a range of stakeholders who are needing to deliver against this. There's nobody in the data business in Saudi that's not aware of these requirements and how hard they are and to deliver against them. It's kind of like a galvanizing view. And so exciting time to be here, and exciting time to present to you. And what has been particularly challenging is coming into an environment where the maturity of the environment is really low, in particular the maturity of the parties who need to deploy these processes. They're coming off a low base. They've just never done that before. And so it's quite an important goal to maintain, is to realize that one needs to guide and lead and teach, and also meet these kind of compliance requirements that at times can be quite onerous. And so that's been the challenge. And how does one do that? And it's in that context that this data value-driven management playbook has been just this overarching theme that we've been trying to honor, because it does both. How do we guide and lead in a way that is honoring of the parties who want to ramp up in skill but not there, and equally meet these relatively robust goals in terms of compliance? And so, but that is not dissimilar to most situations that some data professional might find themselves in. You get into an environment, you see that the maturity of the environment is low, there are aspirations. How does one handle that? And we're finding that this data value-driven management playbook process has been really easy to talk to, easy to gather momentum over and and build a level of excitement. So just a reminder, what it involves is that it involves a key focus on exploring those aspects of business through the eyes of business, that if data were to work harder, be more available, be more trustworthy, be more applicable, business would be able to turn that into a value proposition. And so this ideation process with business, we practiced some different techniques, and it's been really interesting, the quality of use cases coming out. And you can think of these use cases being expressed in like a galvanizing user story. It's like, I would really like this in order to enable that so that I can. And so what we see here is this ideation process results in use cases, and then these use cases are the discrete elements that one uses to fire down the data management channel with the intention
The sprint train.
With the intention of being able to deliver a valuable packet of work, recognizing that there is a myriad of complexity of things that need to be fixed. But what I love about a use case is it doesn't say, I don't have to be perfect. I have to be good enough for the use case. Now, of course, if the use case involves deploying data outside of your firewall into a citizen kind of environment where you've got people coming in, well, all of a sudden the requirement for data integrity is higher than if you're within your four walls and you deploy into business people, and there's a high understanding where a data score of 70% is acceptable to make some of the decisions. So bottom line, it's got this use case. It goes through the, you said it, I've forgotten it.
Sprint train.
The use case goes through the sprint train. It jumps through feasibility, data strategy, oversight, and implementation. And what was interesting, Mark, where you said you started with data strategy, is it's been really powerful to see this use case. The use case must pass through the data strategy corridor and demand and dictate those aspects that either are in the data strategy that need to be applied to it, or the use case has found holes in the data strategy that the data strategy needs to add to itself in order to help the use case remain a viable data product. And then this thing is bootstrapped with an assurance process of guaranteeing that there's value between each step. The feasibility, make sure it's valuable. The data strategy means that it aligns. The oversight means that it's scalable in the practice, and then the implementation means that there's like a very valid sequencing of the data requirements depending on the use case. And then, of course, you might remember Howard, you did a thing called monetize your data. And I love that presentation because one of the first slides, I'll still visualize at top left, it said, you've got to bake your data in. Didn't quite appreciate what that meant at the time, but the more I see some of these solutions, it's every single time a use case produces any level of data, bake it in, turn it, get that feedback loop going. And so that allows you that governance and the data baking. Just quickly, next slide, please.
And then just a quick comment there was, now if you guys go and do any research on Industry 4.0, and they say this is the strategy, this is how to do it, there's almost 60 typical use cases that they're saying one should contemplate within their program. So lots of open or generic strategies are even suggesting the use case, that sort of level of execution and level of throughput within the organization. So what we are certainly doing is we have to connect our use cases in our data strategy to a digital strategy, that's a digital transformation that contains use cases that comes from Industry 4.0. So this is also quite a good alignment approach.
And so I just wanted to link this back to the principle of the path, because remember there are two paths that need to be executed concurrently within the framework of a data management office or an EIM kind of management process. And that is, you've got to increase the value of the data asset, and that's depicted by the top bracketing. And at the same time, you need to make sure that the data management process matures in capability so that you get you kind of get positive feedback with respect to the data assets. So this image has been really powerful. It's grounded us. It's quite easy to lose sight of where you're heading, particularly when things need to go fast and they get hard. And this picture has been really useful. So what we've done now is we're just going to go through some double click as to what does this look like. And so the first thing is data value-driven alignment. And you saw that slide, how it spoke about the vertical axis being almost business alignment, the horizontal axis being your management alignment. But now you see multiple stakeholders, industry, the national bodies, and in this particular case, the ministry. Next slide.
Don, I see you requesting control. Would you like to add something? Or
no, sorry about that. That was just a click. I was just trying to view the image because it's a really interesting one.
Okay, all right, no problem. Great. We can enlarge it and we can share that.
So it's going to get a little bit complex now because it's all nice but what does that mean? And now we're starting to see the evolution of the use case methodology, the data value driven alignment. And this was a picture that landed about 2 weeks ago, and it really gave us confidence to be able to walk through this use case driven data value driven alignment. And today, from the perspective of the data professional, we have really done a double click in terms of how you execute against this particular, I'm going to call it a bit of a straw man. So you remain business aligned, how do you actually execute? And this is where I'm going to join it in with the initial part of our discussion, which is the demo wheel versus like a linear flow of actions to take. And that's what we want to spend today on. And we want to make it real as to how we've actually done it so far through the planning phase.
So what we also must say here is that whilst we say it's linear, let's say you have enough resources to drive 3 or 4 use cases. those can happen in parallel, given that they're not trying to establish the same asset on the same data set. So there's a level of
There's a level of scale.
there's a level of scale that you get, and that's where the sprint train comes in.
So what we've done here is we've used, this is now the view for the data professional. We've now left the data, we've left everybody else. It's now about how do you execute and deploy. And what's quite important about this slide, and we're going to use this slide as our foundation as we move through the 14 odd knowledge areas that we've needed to deliver some compliance against. And so I think it's a good idea just for us to really ground this slide. It's been very useful to give us our guidance, and we're going to use it for the next 14 slides. So allow me to just make sure we are clear as to what this is doing. So what this view does is that it's an integrated data domain view as defined in this particular case by the Saudi ministry in conjunction with the DAMA knowledge area perspective. So there's a very high level of overlap, which is exciting, but there are some elements that are defined in each one. And so what you're looking at here is the convergence or merging of the data domain as defined by a country national data management office, and then the DAMA body of knowledge. Probably the key item here is it happens really on, and it's the way in which you prioritize the use case. We highlighted last week that DAMA is not all that outspoken with respect to how you go about valuing the data asset. It says you must, but it's like, well, how do you do it? When do you do it? And how do you make sure that it actually is a trigger event as your use case moves all the way through towards a data product? And so we must never lose sight of what we're doing here. Is we need to go through a set of steps that transform a use case, which is a statement of intent, to an actual data asset, which is something that has value, and the longer and the more it gets used, it becomes more valuable. And that's what we're seeing over here from left to right, is we've got the ideation process results starting, offering a use case. It's businesses' idea and intent as to what they could do if the data was working harder, faster. And then what needs to be true to get from the far left all the way to the far right, which is where we actually see that the data product is realizing value. And what's key is to not miss some of the steps in between. And for those taxonomy, for those people on the call who have realized how taxonomies can keep you alive, but also keep you honest, I want you to just follow the gray blocks with me, the middle gray blocks. And so on the far left, we have use cases. And then the next step is we have prioritized use cases. And then we have an interesting step, because you can see the datagram just changed. We've now left a use case and we've decomposed it into the data products for the use case. What do we actually...
Sorry. Are we expecting pop-ups, right?
No, they're coming.
Yeah, we just...
Okay.
So what we're just making sure we've got the grain right. So we have use cases, drop into data products, and then the real work starts to say what is my confidence in the data, in this data product, in fact the element, the data element, and then so actually just Howard and I've just acknowledged this slide. We started off with the word product, but actually it's a data element first, goes into a data set, and then we need to verify the data set through a DQ process. And we're going to walk through this in detail. And so you get the veracity of the data increasing, and then right on the far right-hand side, imagine a world where your business intelligence and analytics parties have access to cataloged, accurate, trusted, scored data that's sitting in a repository. I mean, that's the utopian position. And so how does one get to that point, one data set at a time? And so what we're going to do now is use this slide to be our guiding principle as we work through the work that had to take place for the planning part of compliance. and we thought that it would be really useful just to show you how we've used this to guide the process. And next week, we're going to be literally launching into a
case study.
train, lead and guide case study. And this approach is standing the test of that stress. So, so cool. Look forward to you guys staying with us on this. Next one. So first one, please.
Sure.
First one. So what we're going to do is there's an ideation workshop process. I think we've spoken about that quite extensively. And the intention here is to drive a portfolio of use cases where one can figure out of what type this use case is. Is it revenue generating? Is it efficiencies with respect to cost savings? Or does it build a new capability and capacity in the business? So very first thing is you get this long list and you make it the responsibility of your DMO. Remember that's data management office, maybe not an acronym everybody's familiar with, maybe the enterprise information management office, the EIM office, not sure. But what's important is this use case portfolio is managed by that party who's kind of reporting directly into the CDO or the CDO incumbent. But it's quite a key thing here that use case is use case portfolio is waiting and being managed.
Ahmed, you had your hand up. Did we answer your question, or would you like some further clarity?
Yes, I was going to ask about the data strategy column, but I don't want to. Are you going to elaborate into this? If I understand from this slide that building the data strategy will depend on the selected use cases.
Yes.
Is that right to assume?
That is correct. Yes.
So every time then, let's say that if I have 4 use cases, I will build my data strategy for the organization based on those 4 use cases.
And just to be clear there, yes, it is the 4 use cases in your current sprint train, but they will be added to the existing set of use cases that have been there. What we have done when we put the data strategy together is also look at the complete portfolio, so to have an understanding of what has been registered, and so that also provides us with an input. But the focus is then on those use cases. So we use, I think at the moment we have something like 49 or 50. I think Paul can confirm that use cases. They give us a description of the challenges that the organization is facing, and we use them to do that SWOT analysis. But then we focus on those that have been prioritized and do a more detailed understanding of how the data strategy is going to support those use cases. So the use case portfolio that JG is talking about. So this use case portfolio has the multiple set, but then we get into a more prioritized view once we've done the feasibility.
So, okay, so the data strategy would be the overall data strategy for the organizations, and then I would come up with some use cases to implement it within a specific period of time.
Yes, that's when we talk about those 100 days, the first 100 days of a CDO,
Right.
or sort of, and we were actually having a discussion now when the people say, how do we roll this out? We said, guys, we have to, it's a high impact first iteration where we have to demonstrate to the organization that it's a positive move forward and it's a positive change. So how do we get those wins that are appropriate, that will, people will recognize that there's value to the process, and they don't just have there's a new person on the block bringing out some new ideas, but we don't deliver and nothing changes. So it is about understanding we need to get things out within that short period of time.
Another question just to you and JJ, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting the presentation, but from your experience, what is the best time period for the use case? As it should be like what, like 3, 4, 6 months, for example?
So we are working on that 100 days.
Okay.
The 100 days thing where the department has to come in and continually demonstrate value. So we're expecting that you shouldn't be cycling longer than 100 days.
Okay, okay, thank you.
And Ahmed, the kind of picture that I have in my mind is that the data strategy gets layered down in a layer by layer. And so it's not that the data strategy is not arrested, it's captured. The data strategy doesn't get captured by any one use case. The use case needs some data assets to be deployed, and the data strategy job is to focus those data assets. And what's been really interesting with the clients at the moment is we've realized that probably, I'm going to say 80% of the use cases, of which there are 50, all depend on a data element that the business has agreed is really unhealthy right now. And so any work that is done on that one particular data element is going to have a multiplying effect of benefit for the others. So I feel like it's quite important to see the impact that every use case has on the data strategy as being one of an amplifying role, rather than just you cobble your data strategy together one at a time. You actually assemble your data strategy in an amplified or accelerated mode. Cool. So so what we're doing now is if you've got the use cases, how do you prioritize? And there, what we've brought in is this construct of, you've got to look at it from two perspectives. Next slide, please.
So just to show you these, so we went wide in the beginning. We got a lot of the digital strategy, transformation strategy. We also had a 2-week session with 6 or 7 different engagements with business, and we spent time building this use case portfolio. Now that gave us a wider and a higher view rather than 1 or 2 use cases.
So going to just go through this quickly. The data management, the data maturity assessment is key because it gives you a score on the feasibility, how hard, practically, pragmatically, with respect to the data elements that are currently in the business, where are they and what's their maturity score. So that in conjunction, next slide, please.
So
sorry, that's an example.
This is the sort of output of that DMMA. So we're saying, we did the use case portfolio, and now we said we did the DMMA. This is the data that we have to use to do the feasibility study.
And now we're going to bring in the other rail that is necessary for a feasibility, and that's got to do with the commercial value. So here you are each use case needs to be classified by its economic value. And there I mentioned that there is a segmentation, and there are different types, and each different data, each different economic type, for example, either revenue generation. If it were a revenue generation use case, immediately it brings in a whole plethora of questions with respect to what pricing model would be best initially in a mature state.
And also the measurement. So that's something that we're picking up a lot. They're saying, but how do we measure this value? And do we involve the strategic management office to ensure that we're making progress on the value?
Right. And so what becomes quite exciting is that you bring this together. Of course, the level of maturity here is what the business has to start, and this in itself is a task that you can get better at, but at least you score with what you know.
Yeah.
And that results in a prioritized set of use cases after you've gone through a set of ranking. You take your ROI, you look at your total cost of ownership, you bring those through into a cost benefit analysis. There are different methodologies. We think consistent is best, because then whatever error that you might be incurring, you are able to just be, because you remember your motive is ranking, as well as testing your measurement hypothesis in terms of your delivery. But you basically come out with a set of prioritized use cases that then get signed off in your governance structure with your data committees. It's quite important to bring these through to just specific numbers, and so you'll see that the ROI gets ranked, the business gets ranked, and these get combined. This is very rudimentary currently, and but you know what? It's interesting as rudimentary as it was, we are relatively confident that the use cases that we've been able to flush, the people are passionate about it. Not just passionate, there's such a big desire to fix it because there's so much pain with it not being fixed. And so great for the client to be signaling they have pain, because it makes it easier for you to price them. What's been fascinating is when your initiatives are governed by your national entity. I guess it's easier when you're sitting in a kingdom and there's a decree versus a democratic, there's a decree versus a, whatever the opposite is, democracy.
Freedom.
I wasn't sure how to express that. I hope I've expressed it okay. Des, that might be something you need to cut out of the video. But what's quite exciting is the national perspective is one of, if we recognize potential data assets that can be shared amongst the different entities that we have in our country, we believe that to be an accelerating factor for our adoption and valuing of data assets as they move across the country. And so that's been a key thing. Open data, there's some rules to that, and of course the data quality. If you're choosing to submit your data elements out into a national environment, that immediately forces you to look after your DQ process. But quite exciting that a country vision is such that they're realizing that the more elements they have in their open data repository, the higher the acceleration rate of innovation, of definitely sharing,
and attracting people to the country.
Yeah, and reduced friction. It's a curated data set. It's there. Use it. Off you go. And so one of the examples that, yeah, cool. So this is just an example of how you go about. Remember, there was a use case, and then that use case decomposes into multiple lines. And so I'm just going to use the mouse here to illustrate. This is at the use case level, and now this use case is going to need 8 data elements. And the first thing you do, interestingly, the first thing you do is you figure out, are any of these items eligible to become open data candidates? And that's a key driver. The country measures themselves on the number of elements that have been published into their open domain repositories. So step 1, open data, very exciting and quite mature as a country to do that. You then go through Ahmed and Mark. This was, yeah, you never lose sight of your data strategy, but what's now happening is your use case is informing aspects of your data strategy that you want to overlay. A little bit stronger in SWOT analysis, or the action plan needs to be increased here. But so that the use case is testing and informing the data strategy of where it needs more air cover and where it's comfortable to bring learning.
And just to contribute there, I know Paul Grobler has also done some of this work, but we use a data SWOT analysis. And we actually see the problems I've had in the last 4 or 5 years building these data strategies. People are very quick to focus on challenges and problems that they have. Then it goes from that to the far extreme of saying, but let's use machine learning and AI and we can conquer the world, but we don't know how. Everybody's told us that we're going to win and we're going to do some amazing stuff, but give me a reality. Whereas when you bring in the revenue generation use case, now you've had a feasibility, you've calculated it, and you understand the opportunity. So it's a qualified opportunity. It's not, oh, well, maybe we can do this and maybe we can do that. No, it's being qualified. There's a level of assessment on that area. So the discussion on the SWOTs is so much easier because you've now spent some time analyzing the feasibility, the value feasibility of your use cases.
And what that does immediately is as soon as something gets hard, it immediately brings in the creativity of, well, can I not get it from somewhere else? And that's been a key part of our learning here, is because this data strategy step has decomposed a use case into its discrete elements, data elements. For example, some GIS data was quite hard to get, and somebody in the business went, no, we're just going to go and get it at source. and you'll see just now then that immediately brings in some of the data sharing stuff. So we're at a data strategy. We're now getting richer and richer layering from the use case onto our data strategy.
And this is then just one of the workbooks that we use to compile the data strategy. And we're just showing how we put it together with all of the business value drivers. So one of their main value drivers is operational excellence. You'll typically find that within ministries or governmental type things. They want to ensure that it's performing as fast and as effective as possible. So here is the capability that we're setting up. Here is some of the business information, and then we look at information dimensions. So this is a spreadsheet and a technique that we've developed to put all of this stuff together.
Great. So we're making good progress. I think that we've covered the data strategy quite well here, but can you imagine all of a sudden this informs the data estate? The use case is either leveraging data estate that exists, or it's starting to say that there's some aspects that there's an aspirational goal that this use case requires in addition to the data estate.
And there immediately we start getting into, well, who's the owner of this area of the data estate? So we start bringing in those discussions. Well, who's probably got the most to benefit or the most to lose out of not getting this aspect of the data estate sorted out? Those are the type of discussions we have in that data strategy setup.
So again, what we're dealing with the use case. We're trying to get the velocity of the use case through this process has to be high, otherwise you're not going to hit the 100 days. And so as this thing comes through, I'm going to maybe we can just jump onto Oversight. We chatted to the data estate. Now, from an Oversight perspective, a couple of things you want to check is, does this use case, and in particular the data elements that make up the use case, does it hit any nerves with freedom of information? Does it hit any nerves with PDP? Because if it does, it's noted and you can kick that action off, but it can happen in parallel. And so this oversight function becomes a really nice gatekeeper for what are the additional discussions that have to take place before this use case can be, can get out the door. But we can carry on going, and that's been a powerful portion. Is that every now and then, particularly the FOI and the PDP type discussions, they sometimes need to go legal. You need to get an opinion. It means that you can branch off a discussion and you can carry on going, assuming that something got through legal, or legal will come back with some conditions, no problem. But you're going, you're moving. So FOI, PDP, DC, that's data classification in terms of risk elements and so on. So quickly, you just get a quick oversight. How are we doing? And sometimes your use case whistles through. Other times it creates a piece of work on different parties. But now all of a sudden your use case has spawned tasks in parallel. But it means that we now can confidently hit the DQ step, which is next. Maybe you can just take us through the DQ.
So you'll notice there that all these slides are examples of, I went too fast. They're actually examples of applying data classification and areas like that. Is that the right slide, or do you want to go back?
Our DQ, our presentation failed the DQ test.
Right.
Cool. But just imagine now we're at DQ. So, that intensity, the use case is saying, what's enough? What's good enough for me to have got to the point where I have now qualified against some feasibility criteria. I've added to the data strategy. I've got my oversight corrections, or at least I've initiated those discussions. And now I need to ask the questions in terms of how good am I with respect to my data veracity, in terms of my habitual trustability. So veracity, habitual trustability. So, but it's a case of we're now at a data set level. So we're not talking about a data element anymore. We've lifted this. We're now looking at a data set. How do we DQ the data set? And once we get a score out of DQ, the nice thing about the DQ scoring is it's dependent on the use case. So two examples, two use cases, different DQ process. So the one is we need to be quite accurate in terms of who the customer is and where they are. The other one is we need to be really accurate with respect to who we get the data from in terms of the data source. So, the one key attribute of data quality for the one use case is accuracy, and the other one is accessibility. No problem. And they get different scores, they get different ratings. The accuracy 70% on the one, the other. The accessibility on the second use case had to be really high. But you know what the really powerful thing is? You're not trying to paint every use case with the same DQ brush. It picks up DQ attributes depending on the value it's trying to deliver, and also its aspiration. Is it going to go to national, or is it going to stay internal?
And then the other important aspect here was that on doing this DQ, we would do the root cause analysis, and we would start picking up the challenges. Are we having problems with the root cause? Is it the lack of reference or master data? Is it due to data modeling? Is it due to misunderstanding? Is it due to data sharing and integration issues? So that's the DQ then guides us in terms of what are the next set of steps that need to be applied to this data set to get it as a data asset and have it cataloged. That's the task. That DQ is almost that gateway. If we don't understand the engineering that needs to be applied, in some cases we can just do all of it, and then it doesn't really help. So DQ gives us that starting point and understanding of what needs to be done to bring this right.
So what I'm going to pick up now is on DSI, standing for data sharing and interoperability, was that use case where this use case needed strong GIS information. And when we went and looked for the source of the GIS information, the person said, no, we're actually getting it from the wrong place. We actually want to go to the true source. We're going to go to the actual geospatial society. I forget what the association's name is.
Saudi GIS.
And so all of a sudden they're saying, no, let's not spend any time curating a data set that we've learned. There's another data set that's much better. So that all of a sudden, when it comes to remedial action, sometimes the remedial action is not to fix, it's to fetch from somewhere else.
Yeah.
Then, sometimes the master data is not mastered. And so just go back one. Paul Krobler, this one's a special one for you. The data, there's a remedial action that they quickly saw that the customer master has outgrown itself, and it didn't keep the data model in check. And so with one or two good changes to the data model, all of a sudden it will restore a level of trust. And so this remedial action is like, what tools are available to me as the data professional that I can quickly institute against the use case that keeps the momentum and the velocity of the use case going? Either I get sharing, or I master the data, or I model it slightly better. And so, I feel like you can almost, hopefully on the call, feel the intensity of just marshalling this use case all the way through to get to the point where it's fine. All of a sudden, I'm that much more valuable. And then as we now head towards the kind of that golden record, it's like the data set has now gone through the sufficient curation that we are now almost giving it the label, you're an asset.
Yeah.
You're in the clean water, you're in the clean water,
The freshwater
reservoir of our data lake. You've got everything that you need, you're there. And then as soon as you're there, then all of a sudden you're offering your ML or your BI and analytics teams just such a richer engagement, such a richer experience. They're coming off catalog data, it's there, but admittedly just for that use case. And here, I guess, is going to be one of our key learnings. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead in terms of the catalog. So the cataloging and that metadata management, normally if you go in there without focus, you never come out because there's just so many things that you can do. But if you go in there with the use case and say, what's the minimum viable what's my minimum viable to get my use case through, define it, done it, and all of a sudden this use case is starting to come through and potentially come through within 50, 60 days, rather than Oversight, we're still sitting, getting our strategy right, and we'll see you in a year.
Yeah. And I think that's an important gate that we've put in here, that we're saying that we're not going to catalog every single data set, data element that's in the organization. Yes, it is there and it's available, but until it reaches a certain standard, it sort of is in a way limited of going into the catalog, because once it's in the catalog, from a data management to DMO point of view, they have to stand true to that, and any data issue needs to be addressed. So the idea is not to open up everything and look at every possible Excel spreadsheet, USB, whatever it is, we will add it into the data set, into the data catalog. It's only done once we get the data asset ranking of that element. Then it's into the data asset, into what we call the freshwater area, and now the production BIA can work off that. Of course, BIA can still work on the data in the data lake, in the dirty area, to understand it. We're not saying you can't do anything. We're just saying when you take any model or anything into production, it should be coming off the freshwater, not the challenging area. Anything on document content?
No, I think we're good. We're good there.
Okay. So that's understanding what records need to be linked and how do we bring some of the information architecture together. And now we come to the data operation.
And so data operations needs to keep all of these processes alive, recognizing that it needs to potentially support use cases that are in UAT, some are in production. And so immediately it brings a level of agility to the data management process, recognizing that not only are you deploying a use case, but you have some data elements that are going through maturing cycles to become data assets in the catalog. And so the DO standing for data operations becomes a lot more sensitized to the current level of maturity of the elements that are moving through. Some are still elements, some are here. And so all of a sudden, if you can imagine the data lake that the data operations needs to support, well, it's got, there are different reservoirs for different functions. And so, and that's been quite an exciting discussion with the people who are responsible for that, because they see it as, they see themselves as relevant, not just providing an IT platform, they see themselves as relevant, provisioning an asset. And then lastly, just from a BIA perspective, is almost BIA can be thought of as that last mile in logistics. Now, without the last mile in logistics, you shouldn't bother with all the other pieces. And so if we use that last mile analogy from logistics, it's a critically important step, but look at its dependencies on what's come before it. And the speed that you can, I guess the definition and speed of these items now starts to, the analytics is informed by the revenue generation. It's almost like you're not sitting with a report writer guessing as to what should be going down. The question is, will someone pay what I said they would pay because I'm delivering this, not just against a visual, but against the answering of the user story that I've now undertaken for my visual to be responsible for. So now you've got your business analyst, your BI and your business intelligence and analytics staff being very clear as to the use case that they're looking to answer. And interestingly, when you look at the acceptance testing of the use case, well, you just take your user story and say, did you or didn't you deliver against the user story? So now all of a sudden your acceptance testing in unit and UAT is immediately asking whether you did or didn't deliver against an asset delivery. And so such a galvanizing thing as it moves through. But how do you?
And then just the other aspect that we have there is that once you have a promised ROI and a payback period, then there's the constant measurement of, are we reaching them? And if we're not reaching them, what's gone wrong? Is it bad pricing algorithms? Is it bad initial definition? And if it is bad, then how do we adjust and how do we get better on that scenario? So one of the core metrics on revenue generation is how well was your ROI? How close are you to your ROI, your difference? And then, of course, your payback period. How long is it going to take? So these become great financial metrics that the board can be looking at and saying, well, guys, what do we do about this product that's not working, or it is working, and can we do some more? But that's the type of discussion that you want to be having in your quarterly data management committee meetings with the CEO, with the business people, to discuss how this product is performing. These are great measures to have for data products, and not just, okay, we think we've done a good job and everything's fine, we've delivered. Well, so what? If it's not making money, then, or reducing the reducing the cost in terms of the platform or the people, then we also have to ask ourselves some questions on that. And that's sort of where we get to. The BIA delivers, and then we have the process of retro cleaning, reviewing what we've done, how we did, and elements like that. So finally, we end up being able to say to the NDMO, this is where we are. We're green here, we're yellow there, and these are the areas that we need to look at. So taking a deep breath and then maybe just stopping, and we apologize for going too long. But this is the suggested sequential path, the suggested approach. Of course, there are parallels in this thing, as JJ has mentioned, but a suggested approach, 4 or 5 use cases at a time, depending on your resources and your skill levels, each one running on their own, and being able to go through the sprint train or to go through this path. We then schedule the work across all these different areas of data management professionals. So just wanted to stop there and then come back to our original question. Do you feel that this is a workable approach? Do you think it's too rigid? Is there something that one can apply, or do we go back to just everybody trying to work together to get the job done? Any comments? Mark, I know that sorry about picking on you. I'd love to hear your feedback. And
yeah, this is good stuff. I think this is a good logical unpacking of the wheel and establishing some sequence. I agree with many of the stuff. Again, it's educational for me because there's stuff in there that I didn't consider. I may have heard about it, learned about it, but forgotten it already. So I appreciate it. Again, the sequencing is valuable.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks, Mark. Patrick, you got your hand up?
Yes, I'll be a bit biased here. I'm happy to see GIS incorporated in the bigger data structure.
Patrick, there's
we
so
hardly
much
see
work on the GIS stuff here. It's phenomenal.
No, I'm happy to see that. I mean, generally, we don't see GIS being part of the broader data implementation structure in many organizations. So to see it in this light gives me hope. I predominantly work in that space. So we usually have to re-educate a lot of people that know it's data at the end of the day, whether it's a CSV or it's PDF or whatever. We still have to impose the same management architecture. So that for me, I'm excited. Well done.
Thank you. So maybe just to ask some other people, Rob Jackson or Paul Krobler, any feedback from you guys?
I'll go. I think I really like that process. Where's my camera? I really like the process, and especially what sort of got me thinking is that I haven't ever thought about putting the use case in front of the strategy before, and I think that's really practical, because whenever we've done, Howard, you and I, we've done a couple of sorts of engagements, is people, I think we do the right thing and so on. We go through the process of starting with a business and so on, but it's still often too detached from reality for people to then know what to do with it, right?
Yeah.
You have to do some additional work to close that gap. So I really like this use case idea, pushing it through the strategy. That's really brilliant. I was wondering, can you give maybe 1 or 2 examples of use cases that actually went through this process well, and maybe if you do have 1 or 2 that
the one that's amazing, Paul, and I don't want to share too many details, as it's sensitive, but basically what they are battling with, and it's amazing how common these problems are, and that goes back to principle of the path. Everyone's unique, but the problems are similar. So, for example, they've got dashboards that they're presenting to the minister, and people don't believe the numbers. So how many active customers do we have? When last was the contract number updated? When they phone the customer no longer works there. So, this is a typical example of the master data being out of date. They've got another scenario where they've got multiple systems holding master data, contractual and customer, and these things need to be brought together to give a unified picture. A lot of the business people are cobbling it together with Excel spreadsheets and trying to make sense of it. Now, when we heard it for the first time and put it down, 2 or 3 days later, we had another bunch of people that said, this is the first time we've sat down and as a team described all the challenges we have with this data. That hasn't been mastered, it's not reliable, and we need to get it sorted out. And it was great listening to the demands of the business for more appropriate and better controlled information that they could make use of. A lot of the stuff we've heard before, a lot of the challenges we've seen before, but that use case has almost got a life of its own in just talking to the different people and understanding the challenges they have with that fundamental data, that customer 360, that establishing a golden profile on that customer is a massive requirement. And because of that lack of a golden profile, the report on the growth and the report on active customers, which lots of companies face, we've seen that, there's lots of questions being asked.
Okay. And did you find that any of the use cases that you're working with, you had to maybe take a lighter approach, not push it through completely?
Yeah. So this use case that we started with it had all sorts of dimensions in terms of analysis of the economic activity within an industrial area. That was what it was all about. And fortunately, they had a competition almost 3 months before we arrived, and someone was awarded the best idea, but nothing had happened. And the person was saying, if we could just give our customers an understanding of what's going on from an economic point of view in the different cities, it would help them make decisions of where to invest, where to establish different sections around the country. And if they could have open data, that would be fantastic. So this was the process that we've been walking through, and then every time narrowing it down. And I remember JG being JG, he had all sorts of ideas on what we could fix and other things. And we said, no, guys, this is the thing that we have to show in 100 days. We have to show this value. So it's interesting. It's got 4 dimensions, 4 attributes, four critical data elements that need to be delivered. That's it. We've taken all the other stuff out, and our golden profile must be almost those 4 elements.
And Paul, it's interesting the way you asked the question is, as a data professional, and today's course is today's webinar is very much through the eyes of the data professional. When you start here, you go, surely your finance system talks to your ops system, and surely there's no challenge with respect to figuring out whether somebody's a new client or a renewal. Surely, because And the next thing, you've got all these grand ideas about handling growth and so on. And it was so valuable for me to go, until you've clarified and verified the validity of your critical data element, you cannot yet be expansive about your analytics.
Yeah.
So it was such a powerful process for me. And now what we've realized is there is a very big hurdle to get over with sorting out some of the customer master, which means that some of the analytics is not going to be about the economics yet. It's going to be about the percentage improvement of this particular dimension, this particular element, and how it's getting better and how you can trust it more. So it's almost taken the analytics that we would have imposed on or applied to some other things. And as a data professional, realized, meet the client where they are. They're currently suffering a master data predicament that you can deploy good analytics to make sure that everybody rallies around the galvanizing of the improvement of a single dimension. Single dimension, just get that one right first. And so all of a sudden it's recalibrated all of the BI and analytics intent back to using that to illustrate the movement on a dimension, because the pressure on the business remains the same. And I think that this might have been to Ahmed's point. If you come across a really difficult data problem that you actually have to get through, sometimes the business don't appreciate the steps.
Yeah.
They don't appreciate how much water has flown under the bridge to make the problem as bad as it is. And to reverse that process, you literally, it's not a car, you don't take it in and have a mechanic do on it. You actually need to engineer yourself out of trouble. And so what we've realized is that we actually need to present dashboards on the evolution of the data accuracy improvement, because we've realized that we need to empower the user to be able to go back to their constituents and say, this element is currently this number with the following confidence interval, which is going to get better next week. What's the number? We don't know which way the number is going to go, but we do know that the confidence with which we're quoting the number is going to get better. And thereby inviting the principal into this kind of dilemma of data quality, of data assurance, and what you're doing about it. So it's not that you're giving up, it's not that you're fudging the numbers, you present a number with a quality score, and then you show how it gets better. So really, really interesting from a data professional's perspective that sometimes you've got to pivot your desire of what you think you can do to the data in accordance to where the data finds itself. And that's the use case of punching that through and making sure that you can ascribe value, to that.
Don, you've got your hand up.
Thanks, Howard. I guess it's a follow-on from Paul's question, which is that how this framework success seems to hinge in part on being able to get enough information and data to be able to assess use cases well and their feasibility and their payoffs. Do you have any advice about how to collect the right information to be able to inform this framework?
Yes, so that's been good. What we do from a technology point of view, Don, is we do a comprehensive data management maturity assessment. So we would go and analyze the company's ability to produce certain artifacts. Now, one of the nice things about doing this is, for example, if you're doing a use case that's got nothing to do with data sharing, external data sharing, well, you can de-scope that from your assessment. And you're really just focusing on, for example, how good are you at establishing an authoritative source? And if you don't have any master data skills, we've got some challenges that we're going to battle to get out of the blocks. So first of all, from a technology point of view, We do an assessment. I think Paul Frobler is here. We've automated a lot of that. It's sitting on the web. You can go through it, and you can get some really good insights pretty quickly. So that's the one area where within the space of a week you can have an understanding from the technical feasibility level where you're sitting. When it comes to the business side, one of the things that we've done is focus quite a lot on designing a framework, and we were actually very pleasantly surprised when someone presented a similar framework that Deloitte use in terms of structuring how you measure value going back to the business. So they've got some really nice measurements and questions that you can use to understand the value that you contribute. Don, you may have seen those vectors that I did. I know you looked at the Excel spreadsheet, but that value taxonomy has been now confirmed with a management consulting firm that said this is the way we manage or measure stakeholder value, and let's do an assessment on some of those questions. And there's a process of talking through those questions and deriving where the value sits and how to measure that value. The one area that we do know that is going to take some time is the cost of the infrastructure. So what do we, yes, we can look at the money that we can make, and there's lots of product owners around here that do this type of thing when they try to price services and products for customers. So there's experience within the business, but the one that we're battling with is saying, okay, if we were to deploy a digital platform or data as a service, what would it cost? What would it take to establish? What would it take us to get to the maturity to run something like that? Those are areas that we can see that we've got a way to work. We have found quite a few total cost of ownership processes that help us, force us answer these things. And within the next week or two, we'll be sitting with the finance people and the IT side in terms of saying, let's understand the total cost of ownership from an infrastructure point of view. So Don, there's quite a bit of, and this is one of our challenges that we get in doing this. We've got to do quite a strenuous set of feasibility discussions that we're doing. But the amazing thing is, all of those feasibility discussions hinge and explain things about and to the data management professional that they need to know before we start coding and running away and doing stuff. We need to have those type of discussions. Don, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you, Howard.
And certainly happy to share some of those templates, some of those things that we have, explain the sort of processes that we're following. And so what we've currently seen is we almost did a 2-week ideation session. We've done a 2-week evaluation session or feasibility study, comprehensive in terms of technology and value. There are numbers that we need to confirm, but it's been amazing within this period and then also delivering compliance, we've been able to get quite far in terms of that feasibility.
Maybe just to pick up on just looking through some of the questions, if there aren't any other questions from the floor, but maybe just to answer some questions raised. Ahmed asked, is it fair to add machine learning data science after BIA as part of the ROI? Ahmed, great question. Actually, the BIA is a placeholder for all appropriate decision methodologies, of which there are times when the deployment of an ML model is most appropriate for situations where you've got unknown unknowns, and you're looking to traverse large data sets where you're looking for your clustering and your trending. So that BIA placeholder is a placeholder for the institution of appropriate decision methodologies. And sitting inside there is the full range from descriptive all the way down, all the way through to exploratory. And so, Ahmed, I hope that might just, so absolutely, the key part of the opportunities that Industry 4.0 bring is your data is collected at edge, and at the edge of your network, and usually done against a kind of compliant protocol. So the cleanliness of the data for some of these, I call them PLC type devices, but I guess they're more sophisticated than that, is the data is actually quite well structured. And so definitely use cases for that kind of high level of aggregation. So that BIA is a placeholder for all appropriate decisioning methodologies.
Now, Ahmed, what we do get is upfront when the business define the use case, we use that data value chain, and part of that is what insights or analytics and what questions do you need to answer, and decisions that need to be made. And we use then an understanding of taking these decisions, understanding the information that we've got, and then choosing the right analytical process and methods that need to be applied to it.
Makes sense, because yeah, I mean, so they define exactly what they need from the data. Yes. from the start.
Yes, okay. Correct. And then we start,
because I mean there could be, for example, requirements that they need to do some prescriptive analysis, for example.
Yes. So we use that connection framework to position questions, the type of questions according to the type of the state of our knowledge, known, unknown, known, known, unknown, unknown, and we put them into these different quadrants and say this is the type of analytics that you need to answer your question and make that decision. So just giving us some guidance in terms of what this is going to mean when the BIA team starts to run at it. Rob Jackson, I see you've got quite a few questions. I'm not sure. Rob, would you like to just I think you've got a few. Is there a specific question we can answer? Yeah, so Rob, that last question you asked, as you work with more clients, will you find use case replication? Definitely. We went across 3 or 4 different departments, and we just heard this one use case being repeated over and over again, and that helped us bring some focus to the prioritization to say, guys, we've just heard this. This is a real challenge, and if we can get it, we associate the use cases, so we still record it, but then we say it can be dealt with this use case. So it's happy to record it because we need to go back to those owners or the people that asked for it and say, are we dealing with it? Have we dealt with this situation? So whilst we find that a use case has been expressed before, we still want to record it, and then that becomes part of our user story, because we recognize that each person has a story about that use case, and we'd like to re-express the use case in their user story. As a logistics manager, this is my challenge. As a researcher, this is my challenge, so that we know when we get into acceptance testing and stuff like that, and let the BIA team go, they've got sufficient user stories to drive out the answers. Cool, guys. I think we've really overrun.
Yeah, your time management has been so poor.
Paul, what's your thinking at the high level in terms of sequencing the work that we do according to the DM block? Mark, I don't know how you guys feel. Is there? I know Mark was more positive. Is it?
I think you've got a great start here. Again, I started with data strategy, but why not start? I mean, this looks like it's got some basis in the wheel because it's got data governance. Yeah. I think the strategy feeds the data governance policy, but yeah, I think you guys you're onto a great start. Adding some sequence to the activities is already of benefit. So
yeah.
You've given me things to think about for sure.
I agree, and I think the putting the use case first is a is
Yeah.
is quite an interesting move, and it actually makes a lot of sense because it's just difficult to find that thing to bind the actual data strategy, the business goals. It's all good. It's often just to a high level, so I think it's really cool. Howard, I have one last question for you. How much did your nice new beard help with you convincing people to push through the use cases, through this?
Paul, I've got an amazing story.
It's a beard of wisdom.
Someone approached me on the side of the road and said, "You know what? You look like Hulk Hogan." And there's another story behind that, but you won't go there right now.
Howard's got a whole lot of groupies. There's just like a range of groupies in Saudi. The hell of a thing.
No, that's nice, Howard. But to fit in there, you have to make it a fist long. That's the Muslim rule, right? So
yes.
But now you're looking more like Gandalf, right? So now it's even more Gandalf, the Gandalf of data. So good.
Gandalf of data. That's exactly what it is, Paul.
Excellent, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks. Ahmed, if you'd like some, we're not going to be here too much longer. Maybe a cup of coffee before we go.
Let me know when. Tomorrow or Saturday?
Yes, we'll let you know when. We'll confirm. Thank you very much.
Because on Sunday I'll be flying, so I'll be out of Riyadh. So it will be nice to see you.
Fantastic. That will be great. Ahmed, thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you. Cheers.